All right, scatter plots and trends. I think both or all of you should have had some of stuff about trends and things and some of this graphing stuff last year. Some of you had more than others. A scatter plot is really similar to a line plot, but there's a little difference. You don't have to write this on your page, but I'll just do a little example up here so you can see. A line plot has like, if you wanted to do, for example, what would be a good line plot? Like if you had pets, like, no, not pets. Let's do dogs. No, you don't need to add this to yours. Like if you did dogs, cats, and chipmunks. And you wanted to figure out, to make a line plot of this, how many people had dogs at home. And so let's say you had like 3 people with dogs, 1 person with a cat, and a bunch of people with chipmunks, right? You could connect those. It's like one point per thing. And typically you're not going to have dog, cats, and chipmunks. It might be more like speed or distance, things like that. How long something lasted. But so you don't need to have that on there. But that's more of a line plot. A scatter plot, though, is going to have more options for each x value. So dogs, you can only have people can have dogs. You're not going to have like 2 different categories of people with dogs. So, for example, like if you did time studying and like test grade percentage, which is my example here, like if you said 1 hour and 2 hours, right? You could have Alex and Gavin could both study for an hour but get different percents on their test, right? So you could have 2 points here, right? Or, somebody could score in between the 2 of them, right? That could happen. So that's where we're going to use a scatter plot.
Can you write that down?
You can put those dots on there. So what is a scatter plot? So we'll kind of get the definition here. A scatter plot is a set of points. It's a set of points that shows a relationship between 2 sets of data. So a relationship between 2 sets of data. So in my example, relationship between time studying and test grade. So now, obviously, other people could study more, and they could get in here. We could have points all over the place. Right? If those are all our people that studied and their test percentages. That's called a scatter plot. And you're not playing connect the dot in a scatter plot. Okay, a line plot, you would connect the dots. A scatter plot, you do not.
Why?
Because it wouldn't make sense. How would you connect these? You wouldn't connect those 3 together. Like, where would you connect them? Would be the question.
I don't know.
That's why we don't do connect the dots on
Like
it.
connect the dots.
I know, connect the dots is fun, especially when it makes a picture. So my first little or bullet point there under scatter plots, use instead of a line graph when 1x, so when time studying in this example, 1x value can have more than 1 y value. So you can have more than 1 y value for 1 hour. Molly can study for an hour, Eric can study for an hour, and Elise can study for an hour. And they all 3 could get different percentages. these dots are not always in a straight line. In fact, often they're not in any sort of line at all. So what do we do with this data? Well, it helps us visualize things again. But then we have this thing called a line of best fit. And it's also called a trend line. So what's the trend? What's the trend? A trend line. So in our time studying, you would think that the trend should be the more hours you study, the better you do on your tests. And if you look at that data, it kind of looks that way, but maybe not. So we represent things with three different types of trends. And these trends are positive, negative, or no trend at all. So positive trend, I'm going to put just a few dots on here. And it tends to trend up and to the right. So a positive trend there, up and to the right. So you would then draw a trend line, and your trend line is going to generally go through the middle of the data. So you roughly want the same number of dots above and below the line. So let's say my trend line goes right here. There's roughly the same number of dots above and below my line. In that case, that's a positive trend. It's getting higher as it goes to the right. So if that's a positive trend, what do you think a negative trend would be?
All of them are good at the beginning, or real bad. They're all bad.
It goes down. So let's put a few dots on there. So you got your dots on there, and it generally shows that the data goes down. That's a negative trend line. A lot of people think that a no trend would be lines that go straight across, but it's not. A straight across would be there's no change in the trend. That's actually is a trend. But so in this case, it's just kind of just random dots. Basically, in other words, you can't really draw a line to fit those dots. That would be a no trend. Okay? All right, so a trend, if we get back to our line of best fit underneath there, shows what we call a pattern. Shows a pattern. That's what our trend lines are doing. They help us, they help estimate. So for example, if it's this positive trend, if you went over here and you said, okay, where is it? Well, do you go up to the line? Do you go up to this dot? Where are you picking when you go from here? Well, the trend line helps us, and then you can go over and figure out, if it's, I spent 2 hours studying, what should I get on my test? It gives us an idea. Okay, so it doesn't give us a one set data point. It's a best fit for the data. All right, and then these three on the bottom here, when we're graphing, just to give you some help as you graph on your questions, we're going to start with the middle one there. Typically, when you see data laid out, if you see it vertically, there'll be two columns, like an X and a Y. And 99.9% of the time, the X is on the left and the Y is on the right.
Not like stem and leaf.
Not like stem and leaf, nope. This would be like coordinates. Okay. And then same with this horizontal one, X would be on the top 99.9% of the time, and Y would be on the bottom. Okay. In science class, you'll hear the words independent and dependent variables.
Yeah, we already did.
So the independent variable is your x and the dependent is your y. So in those cases, if they talk about independent and dependent variables in the math book or in science, you know which one represents which. So now when you get to a graph, this far the left drawing there, the independent variable always goes on the x-axis, which is the horizontal one. And the dependent would go on the y. So the dependent depends on what happens with the y. So your x always comes first because that is controlling what happens with the y. So you got your x and your y there on your axes. So in my example here, if we got study time and your grade. So like your grade here depends, it's dependent on the study time. The more you study or how much you study will affect your grade. So the study time would be on the x. Time is almost always, and in our case in this class, time will always be on the x-axis. So if it's a measurement of time, it is your x value no matter what. Okay? You guys have any questions on those?